Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, is Islamic law being enforced by vigilantes in the streets of London? We examine the so-called Muslim Patrol. As always, our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is bringing in all your live interaction. Malika, we published a web piece on this story a few days ago. The response has been huge. How would you characterize the reaction?
Exactly. So within 24 hours of posting it, we got nearly 1,000 Facebook comments. And now, as you can see on my screen, I pulled up this graphic here. We have more than 6,000 shares of this story and counting. And just this weekend, I got into very heated conversations with people online who were eager to join the show. So this is a live discussion, and we want to hear from you. Tweet us with the hashtag AJStream to join the conversation.
Right, and for those of you who'd prefer to use more than 140 characters, Google Plus is another way you can be in the stream. Just go to the link, it's right there below, add us to your circles, and post your comments and questions.
Hi, I'm Akila Hughes. I'm a blogger at it'sakilaobviously.com, and I'm in the stream.
Is Islamic law coming in parts of London? A series of videos under the name of Muslim Patrol have been circulating online in recent weeks. The videos, which are anonymously filmed and posted on YouTube, show young men patrolling East London neighborhoods like Whitechapel and Tower Hamlets. In some, they confront people who they believe are not conforming to Islamic law.
To not dress like that in Muslim area. It's a Muslim area.
Alcohol, bad. This is a Muslim area. No drink in this area. This is Muslim area.
Okay.
What is? It's a Muslim patrol. We Muslims, we patrol the area, forbidding munkar, forbidding evil.
Remove yourself away from the mosque. Go away from the mosque now. Muslim patrol. Muslim patrol. Don't be allowing her to puke outside the mosque.
This is Muslim area.
Do you understand?
So those actions of the patrols have been condemned by the East London Mosque, who responded on its website by saying these actions are utterly unacceptable and clearly designed to stoke tensions and sow discord. We wholly condemn them. The actions of this tiny minority have no place in our faith nor on our streets. A local religious representative, Sheikh Shams Aduha Muhammad, also addressed the Muslim Patrol phenomena in a Friday sermon. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
It's just, it's some kind of problem. I don't know. I don't know if it's a psychological problem or what. That people think that just because I've now become practicing and so on and so forth, I've got to go around and behave like a complete bigot. What people forget is that how I behave, just believing in La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah and praying and implementing Sharia in myself, doesn't give me the right to go and behave how I like outside of myself.
Despite the condemnation and the arrest of 5 men involved in the patrols on the suspicion of harassment, these groups are committed to creating Muslim zones. So why are they doing this? And if they do not have the approval of local Muslim officials, who do they represent? To help answer these questions, we're joined by a number of guests via Google+. Abu Abbas, a Muslim Patrol organizer whose group has a website and a YouTube channel under the name of the Sharia Project. Sheikh Shams Aduha Muhammad, a local imam and the director of the Ibrahim College. Weiss Islam, former labor counselor in Whitechapel. Shalina Jan Muhammad, a London-based writer who recently published a piece titled Muslim Patrol, Anti-Muslim Hatred and the Need for Moderate Voices to be Heard. And Zahed Amanullah, Chief Media Officer at Unitas Communications. And finally, via Skype, we are joined by Jane Kelly, a journalist at the conservative Salisbury Review, who wrote an opinion piece titled, I Feel Like a Stranger Where I Live. Welcome to all of you. Abu Abbas, I want to begin with you. You're one of the organizers of these Muslim patrols, some of which have taken over the streets and in not so subtle ways insisted that people conform to Islamic law. Why are you doing this? What are you trying to achieve?
Just to make it straight is that we are not, the Sharia project is not part of the Muslim Patrol. We have done patrols in our areas where we live. For example, we did one against prostitution where it was coming onto the streets, and we wrote letters to local residents telling them about what we were planning to do, and the whole basic community was in support of this because the police were not doing anything against it, and people were supporting us from their own houses, etc., and saying we need to get rid of this problem. I think in the UK and in the world generally, there are problems to do with immorality, to do with alcohol, and people are beginning to recognize these problems. The issue is that where does the solution come from for these problems? Because some people, even in the UK, you have areas where people are not allowed to drink, they're not allowed to have alcohol out in the open. So people are realizing that there are problems with alcohol, there are problems with prostitution. So how do we deal with these issues? So obviously as Muslims, we have the Quran, which has a solution to all of these problems. So as Muslims, we should offer these solutions that we have to society to make it a better place for all of the people to live in.
So Abu Abbas, you're differentiating your group and what you do from the clips that we just showed. What should the method be? What is the correct approach?
Obviously, look, we have a situation that some of these things, such as alcohol, such as gambling, such as abortion, such as prostitution, these things are actually legal in the country we live. So even if I as an individual believe this thing is something wrong or something bad, there's not much I can really do about it because the state is not on my side, the authority is not on my side. So what we can do is start by talking to the people, making them understand that the illnesses that these things create in society, the broken homes, the addictions it creates, the many problems it creates for the NHS. So people need to wake up to the facts that these things do have
Abu Abbas, I want to interrupt you there, and I want to show folks a clip from one of the Muslim Patrol videos. Take a listen to the way these people approach Londoners.
Move away from the masjid.
Go away now. Don't come back. Don't come back.
Don't come back.
Keep your mouth closed.
Do not consume alcohol. It is haram for your own necks.
We don't respect those who disobey God. We don't respect them.
I'm so appalled.
We don't care if you're appalled at all.
Muslim Patrol.
A Muslim area. It's Great Britain.
This we don't care. It's not so Great Britain. Not so Great Britain. Do you understand?
It's vigilantes like this.
Vigilantes implementing Islam upon your own necks.
So Abu Abbas, what do you make of that approach?
Maybe I believe the approach is not the best manner in which to do it. I believe they've learned some knowledge from Islam about commanding good, forbidding evil, but the way they have gone about it may have not been the best way. But what I would like to say is, in comparison to these, I believe 5 individuals that did do this, the evil that alcohol and all of these other immoralities create in society is a far bigger issue that needs to be discussed than these 5
well,
individuals.
that is a moral issue, so depending on who you discuss it with, you're going to get a different answer. Sheikh Shamaz Adoha Muhammad, I want to get to you. What's making people do this? Sheikh, I think you need to unmute yourself.
I'm not sure that there's a straightforward answer to that, Lisa. There is an ideology underlying the people who are going around doing things like this. They are part of a particular movement and a group that through a specific, very specific narrative convinces people that this is actually their religious duty and this is what they need to do as Muslims. And the idea of enjoining good and forbidding evil is contextualized to their reality, and that's how they end up on the streets of East London.
So is this wrong Islamically?
Well, enjoining good and forbidding evil is something that everyone, including British society at large, buys into in some way, form or another based on their own specific set of values. I think everybody then ultimately differs in the manner in which they go and do things like that. So I think whether people agree or disagree with Islam as a religion, there are some fundamental values that govern what they think is right and wrong, and accordingly they enjoin good and forbid evil. So I think what we're all sitting here talking about is really the method employed and the wider kind of narrative that is employed by groups such as these. And I think it's important to identify that we are talking about specific groups of people with a specific leadership that very, very vocally endorses this type of activity.
Well, Jane Kelly, I want to go to you next because I want your thoughts on this. Of course, you wrote a piece that I pulled up on my screen here in the Telegraph. I feel like a stranger where I live. And I'm wondering, I'd like you to weigh in on the issues, approach aside, the issues that Abu Abbas raised, that there are societal ills. prostitution, there are drug problems. There's questions here about your piece on Twitter. Aisha says, when you refer to good areas, quote unquote, in your article, are the good areas determined by not having ethnic minorities living there? Can you explain the thinking behind your piece?
Well, there's two things there. The man who spoke earlier about Muslim patrols, and he was supporting them, I would say to him, Britain is a free-thinking, hard-drinking, dog-loving nation. So what are you doing here? Why are you living here? I don't understand why a religious Muslim would want to live in Britain. It's a puzzle to me. But that aside, I would say my piece was just about an observation piece about how the area has changed so much, the area I live in. And I wasn't picking on any particular group of immigrants at all. But obviously the Muslims are very noticeable because of the women being in the niqab. But also, I wrote this before these Muslim patrols were in the news. And I had noticed that my local food shop had put up a sign saying no alcohol allowed on the streets around the shop. And I thought, this isn't right. And I went in and I spoke to the man. I said, you can't do that. You can't control the streets. And he didn't really have any answer for me at all. Sort of wistful look, as if to say, well, he couldn't control the streets, but he'd really like to.
Abu Abbas, I want to give you a chance to respond to Jane here. She's saying essentially, why are you trying to impose your culture on the British? If you don't like the culture there, go someplace where your beliefs are more widely held.
I believe, obviously, across the world, whether you talk about the East or the West, Islam in its totality is not being implemented on a state level. So whether we talk about Somalia,
here, my dear, so go and try it somewhere else.
Whether you talk about Somalia, whether you talk about Afghanistan or Iraq, none of these places actually implement the Sharia or Islam in its totality. As a Muslim living here, it doesn't mean because I live in a place that I must adopt the way that certain people live. Rather, I'm a Muslim wherever I live, whether I live in the East or the West. I'll always abide by Islam. And the second question is, people are so upset about these 5 individuals going around supposedly enforcing certain rules of Islam upon non-Muslims. However, no one seems to talk about the fact that French will go into Mali, where the Muslims over there in northern Mali wanted to implement the Sharia Islamic law, but yet France have gone in there to kill them and attack them. The same thing that happened in Somalia.
Abu Abbas, I want to stop you there. Sheikh, jump in here in terms of, one, how much harm, if any harm, you think this approach is doing, and two, at what point is this small group trying to indoctrinate the community around it, and is that all right to do?
Well, their approach is completely un-Islamic. I think there's absolutely no doubt about that, and I did clear that and explain that in my sermon. And I think a very, very introductory level study of the Sharia and its principles will establish that. As far as what their objectives are and what they're doing, they're misrepresenting Islam. I mean, people like Jane are able to write what they write and say what they say because of people like that. I think Jane and the average Muslim probably have quite a lot in common. And I think her representation of Britain as a hard-drinking and dog-loving country and kind of considering these things to be fundamental descriptors of British people is simply a reaction to the behavior of people like that. I think overall the things that the reason why I'm in Britain is because it's probably the best place to be if you want to serve humanity and try to make the world a better place. And I think that's why I'm here.
Well, speaking of serving, I'm sorry, keep going.
So I think that's the key. So now when people like the Sharia Patrol come and do what they do, then we end up being misrepresented. And as a minority, people are able to say things that then ultimately affect the rest of us. And for that reason, we need to come out and we need to set the record straight.
Well, Sheikh, before I accidentally cut you off there, you were saying that you were there to serve humanity. And speaking of that, we got a tweet here from Hassan Patel. Muslims in different parts of the UK who help clear snow, he says, and help elderly people outdid the Muslim Patrol rhetoric. I want to pose this one to Shalina Jan Muhammad in our Google Plus Hangout, because you mentioned the Snow Patrol in an article that you recently wrote and said basically that doesn't get enough attention as this Muslim Patrol does. Elaborate on that?
I think one of the problems of this whole story is that it's been just a handful of people literally filming this on their mobile phones, and suddenly it's been catapulted into a national and international story when so many Muslims and so many organizations have come out and condemned them. And yet you have fantastic stories like Muslim Snow Patrol. In the UK, the country comes to a standstill when we have a flurry of snow, and these men went out to clear pavements from local community streets when the local authorities couldn't do it. We had a story in South London where young Muslims went out to celebrate the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad and handed out roses to people to show them a sign of their affection.
So Shalina, we've got Jane on one extreme, we've got Abu Abbas on the other extreme. How do we get to the middle ground here and actually hear the voices of the masses that are caught somewhere in between?
I think the challenge is that, with respect to Jane, she's going back to this kind of a new way of dressing up racism, frankly. I mean, we go back to her article and she says, you know, there used to be a good racism in the olden days. We kind of muddled along. And today it's anti-Muslim hatred. And the irony of it is that these Muslim patrols and the way that Muslims have come out and condemned them come in the same part of London, East London, which has a history of immigration and a history of fighting off racism, right going back into the early 20th century. And so we need to keep plugging away at fighting this racism and fighting this hatred that comes to all these people who come to the shores of Britain.
Jane?
Well, Islam is not a race. You can talk about Islam without having any thought about race at all. And I would like to point out that I live in West London, miles away from the patrols that have been set up in Tower Hamlets. So it's all over London, this problem. And a lot of people, free-thinking liberal people, think that Muslims who have a view that they should impose Sharia law, those Muslims should be challenged. Whatever the race they are, they have to be challenged because they have a very bad ideology.
Well, Zahid Amanullah, I'd like you to respond to that and also to this Facebook comment that we got from Pamela, who says Muslims are the most intolerant people. They forget that they're the minority, and 90% of the countries that they live in, we are just too nice to Muslims. Zahid?
Well, first of all, these comments are reflecting sort of a phenomenon of the internet right now, that these minority views are being represented as majority views. And what we're missing here is, you know, we have a vast silent majority of Muslims that are actually living very, very peacefully with their neighbors. Shalina was mentioning some of the stories that we don't see publicized about good things that people do. I know personally a lot of Muslims who during Ramadan go and feed the homeless, but because it's not as sexy as some of these really dramatic stories, people don't hear about them. And maybe that's the challenge for us, is that we have to show that the majority of Muslims in here are good citizens. They have much more in common with their fellow Brits and fellow Americans or fellow Westerners than would seem when you see these videos.
Weiss Islam, you're a former labor counselor in Whitechapel. I want to get your take on this. Is this a sign of things to come, or are these isolated incidents?
Thank you, Lisa, for having me on. First of all, I'd like to say that you have a brilliant panel there. I don't agree with what Jane is saying, that Muslims are a problem and Muslims should go back to their own country. I myself was born in the UK, and I regard myself as a British person. 400,000, Jane, 400,000 Muslims fought for the British Indian Army in 1914, September 1914. Thousands of them gave their lives for Great Britain. You should be grateful to Muslims for defending Great Britain. That's the first message I'd like to say. Secondly, immigrants and Muslims and people in general who contribute to the UK economy are a vital force to keep this country stable in terms of financial well-being. So for you to condemn Muslims in your article and your video in the Sunday Times, for which I was also interviewed, I think is totally wrong. We must understand that London is a multicultural place which is inhabited by people from all different races. Islam is a peaceful religion, and you are sensationalizing it by trying to portray this image that Muslims are here to dominate this country. No, that is not true. I'd like to say to the Sharia project person that you must come out more openly to condemn these Muslim patrol groups. They are a minority, a very small minority amongst Muslims. They do not represent Islam or Muslims in the UK. Muslims are law-abiding citizens on the whole, and Muslims abide by the law of this country. And Islam, in simple terms, means peace and submission to the will of Allah.
Well, Wais, I want to give Jane a chance to respond to that and this tweet from Nafizi. Jane, Nafizi says, Europe is gradually recoiling into a closed society due largely to religious and racial xenophobia. What do you say to people who say that your article basically is doing the exact same thing that the Muslim patrollers are doing?
Well, I was disturbed to find that. First of all, I was asked if I would not put my name on that piece, as if there was I was risking my safety by putting my own name on a piece of writing. There's a great deal of fear about that because people have been killed by Muslims for drawing cartoons and writing things that Muslims don't like. There's been a big impact in Europe and in Holland, I'm thinking of, where someone was murdered in the street for making a film about Islam. You can't blame people, non-Muslims, for being nervous and alarmed. And I found white liberal people attacking me. And there seemed to be as if there's some law that I don't know about which says you cannot write anything about this subject. You can't speak about this subject. And if you do, you'll be called a racist. Well, that is beyond me. I can't understand it. I live in a free country and I'll say whatever I like. And I don't want to be told what I can say or what I can't say.
Abu Abbas, Jane raises an interesting point. I want you to respond to that, and also this idea that these actions of the Muslim patrols actually validate this image put forth, this negative image put forth by some against Muslims who are, people who are already opposed to the Muslim community. It just validates it.
Firstly, I would like to say that from Jane, you can see is the hatred towards Islam and the Muslims in general, and this is not something new. Obviously, you can see the people banning the burqa inside France, inside Belgium, and this is the usual. What you expect. This is Islam. The Muslims are people. We believe in piety. We don't believe in stuff like pornography or prostitution or gambling or alcohol. How comes it's not allowed for us to say that's wrong, but it's allowed for the other people or non-Muslims to say Islam is wrong? Rather, no, the one who believes that a woman should be unchaste and that a man should drink on Friday night and become drunk.
But Abu Abbas, the methods of the Muslim patrol, while you say you're peace-loving and extremely moral, suggest otherwise in the level of aggression and disrespect that is seen toward people who are not bothering you, who are not aggressing toward you. They're simply walking through the streets of London, of which they have every right to walk.
Can I just repeat again, is that I am not nothing to do with Muslim Patrol. We are called the Sharia Project. We have our own YouTube channel. We have our own website. We're not nothing to do with Muslim Patrol. I'm not someone, I believe they're my Muslim brothers. This is what I know of them. I'm not going to stand here and start condemning them. What I would say is
you're
that
you're not going to condemn those actions?
No. Why should I?
Even though Sheikh Shams has?
First, in comparison to the amount of oppression that is happening.
Right. But Abu Abbas, I'm curious here. You're sitting not necessarily side by side, but on TV, you're side by side with Sheikh Shams, who has condemned those actions. You do not agree with the Sheikh?
No, I said maybe I don't believe that is the correct way that they're doing it, but I'm not going to stand here or sit here on live TV and condemn those brothers. Rather, they are my Muslim brothers. Yes, they may have done something which is maybe not in the best way, but I agree with them that yes, alcohol is a problem. Prostitution, all of these things inside society is a problem and they needs to be dealt with. And the solution is the Quran, is Islam, is the Sharia. Whether someone believes that yes, we should have some newspaper.
Can I just come in there, please? Can I just come in there?
Yes, please.
Yes. I think it's very important for your viewers to know that Muslims on the whole strongly, in the strongest terms possible, condemn the actions of Muslim Patrol.
Vice Islam, I need to hold you there because we're out of time, but we're going to continue this conversation in our online post show. So please go to stream.aljazeera.com if you're not already there for the rest of this conversation. Welcome back to our online post show. We're going to pick up where we left off. White Islam, I want to get back to you in a moment. You were talking about the idea that vigilantism doesn't work, but I want to give Sheikh Shams a moment to jump in here because we know you're going to have to leave us fairly soon. Sheikh Shams.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Very, very quickly, I want to. There was a little soundbite in what Abu Abbas said about enjoining good and forbidding evil, and I want to just point out that speaking out against some of the views that Jane has espoused here, and speaking out against the Muslim patrol is the very essence of the Islamic notion of forbidding evil, and for that reason, we should come out and condemn our own Muslim brothers when they do something that is wrong. Forbidding evil is a universal good trait that is really transcends religion to a certain extent. So I think that's the first thing. I want to address, I echo a lot of the comments that have been made by Shalina, by Brother Zahid and Councillor Weiss. I want to just address this issue of that question that you asked of how we achieve the middle ground, because at the end of the day, we've heard a lot from two sets of extreme voices that are getting a lot of coverage. I think we need to address the fact that that coverage is being provided by the media, and the media, i.e. yourselves, have a responsibility of actually giving some coverage to the middle ground, which is the majority of people. And if the media is supposed to represent the lives and the stories of the majority of humanity, then it needs to showcase the good work, like the Muslim Snow Patrols, and like the thousands and thousands of other projects that are out there in the community. That's really, really what needs to make the media, rather than this type of reaction to these types of isolated incidents. Today, we are sitting here discussing the Muslim Patrol, a tiny minority of people. We are sitting here giving a voice to Jane Kelly. Really, some of what she has said are completely unacceptable. But yet, she has a voice. She's written in the media. She is here today, and I think it's because nobody's interested in hearing the middle ground. And most importantly, the people that are seen and watched and read are not interested in the middle ground. And I think that needs to be stated and needs to be said. As far as our view towards the Muslim Patrol, I think I want to share something with everyone. I actually delivered my sermon, which appeared to be an attack against the Muslim Patrol. But I delivered the sermon because another sheikh actually spoke to me, who was from Leicester, after the Muslim Patrol videos came out, and said, Sheikh Shams and other imams, because we had a little forum of teachers and imams and so forth. And he was upset at the fact that we weren't directly engaging with these people and talking to them directly, and creating a sense of isolation for them. And many of these people, their leaders create this coherent kind of narrative for them that feeds on their isolation. It says, you're like the Muslims of Mecca, you are like the people of Darul Arqam, this is why society boycotts you. It's because you have the infidels on the one hand, and then you have these hypocritical Muslims on the other hand, all of whom are boycotting you because you are on the truth. And to a certain extent, we are buying into this narrative by really isolating them, not talking to them, not engaging with them, and not treating them as members of our society.
Well, Sheikh Shams al-Doha, in the search for that middle ground, there's some tweets here from people that agree with exactly what you're saying. Reza on Twitter says, the method carried out by the Muslim Patrol is un-Islamic. Forcing your religious ideologies onto someone else is completely wrong. Another from Adiniya, who says, I believe we need to enlighten people around us that groups like Muslim Patrol negate the principle of Islam, which is peace. Now, Shalina, John Muhammad in our Google Plus Hangout, I know that you've been itching to get in here on this conversation, and your piece talked about just this, looking for that middle ground.
I think there have been a couple of things said in the discussion today. One is some kind of strange dichotomy between being free-thinking and being Muslim, as though Muslims can't think for themselves. I think what we hear is the total opposite of that. Muslims too are free-thinking, and establishing that as an exclusion for Muslims is very, very dangerous and actually takes us away from the middle ground. So I think in establishing the middle ground, it's about hearing these Muslim voices. I think the media and the press really has to take responsibility for taking these tiny stories and giving them disproportionate coverage and weight as though this is the voice of the majority Muslim community when it's not at all and has been widely condemned. And this is the rising tide of stories against Muslims, about anti-Muslim hatred. And in the last few weeks, the Minister for Communities, Sayed Awarsi, has said that being anti-Muslim has passed the dinner table test. It's okay to say all these negative, incorrect, false and misleading things about Muslims. And you know, we're in Europe, and Europe needs to look back to its history and be so careful about the way that it treats its minorities. And in this case, a minority that has contributed so much to Britain and will continue to contribute in the future.
Weiss, jump in here. I mean, do you, one, agree? I mean, you agree that it's okay to say things that are false about Muslims. Has society in the UK devolved to that point?
Well, Islamophobes like Jane Kelly, who are openly racist towards Muslims, she's actually said in an article it's making her a reluctant racist. I think they don't help the situation. We saw what happened to the Jews when anti-Semitism rose in Germany, Nazi Germany, before Hitler's rise. This is very dangerous, what is going on. The hatred displayed in the media, in the right-wing media, by critics, who show so much hatred towards Muslims that the vast majority of Muslims, especially the illiterate ones...
Okay, Weiss, I want to stop you there and give Jane a chance to respond. Jane, go ahead and speak your mind, but also address this issue of where the middle ground is.
Well, listen, I'm very disturbed that I'm being accused of hatred. I do not feel any hatred, and I don't have to feel hatred in order to have an opinion. Why are Muslims so sensitive and think that people hate them? You would be surprised to know that most people in this country are indifferent to religion. And when I was growing up in the 70s, most people in Britain had never heard of Islam and weren't aware of it except in a very hazy way. And the first time we got to know about it was in 1979 when the Ayatollah went back to
Got about 30
Paris
seconds left,
to
Jane.
Tehran. Pardon?
About 30 seconds left.
Yeah, maybe Muslims don't appreciate the way in which they have frightened and disturbed people in the West. Maybe they're not aware of how threatening a presence they appear to be.
Zahid, in our hangout, I'd like to give you the last 15 seconds on that. Why do Muslims think that people hate them?
Well, I mean, there's so much tension going on, miscommunication between people. First of all, I think we're confusing two things: what Islam believes and the actions that people have. I mean, I know a lot of teetotal Englishmen and women who don't gamble and drink. I mean, we keep talking about these in these terms. No one's forcing Muslims to do things, and likewise, people like the EDL and whatever shouldn't be forcing Muslims to change their ways. We can find a common ground. We should appreciate the freedoms that we have in the West, in these countries, and influence people rather than demonize people.
Well said, sir. And with that, we end our program with a big thanks to all of our guests. Now, Tuesday's show, a little bit lighter subject, the world of Potterheads, Whovians, and bronies. Can pop culture obsessions actually be a medium for social change? We're taking a closer look at the impact of internet fandom. Until then, we'll see you online.